The title of our case is Pink is for Girls, Sugar and Spice and Everything Nice, a Case of Single-Sex Education. My name is Jennifer Martin from the University of Mount Union, and to answer the question, what compelled me to write this case, is a little bit of a long and complicated story, but it's a good one. I first became acquainted with case study pedagogy, as I call it, when I did an institute at Harvard on women in educational leadership. And the facilitators there used many case studies to teach about various aspects of leadership. And one case that was very transformational in our learning was the Mount Everest case, as I'm sure many are familiar. And this case is very complicated, it's multi-layered, and it forces the reader to look at various aspects of conflict and what went wrong in various leadership styles. When I returned from Harvard, I realized that I wanted my students, both undergraduate and graduate students, to be able to learn through case study, and I wanted to learn to teach through case study. And when I looked beyond the Mount Everest case, I found very little existed but for this journal. And I found that cases on issues that my students were interested in and that I was interested in, there weren't many out there, except for in the Journal of Cases in Educational Leadership. So I invited my colleague Jane to collaborate with me, and we began to write our own cases, most of which had a social justice or educational equity bent to them. What drove me to create a case based upon single-sex education experiments is that these experiments are really happening in U.S. publication despite evidence to the contrary, that this is best practice, despite violations of Title IX, despite suits brought by the ACLU. So the impetus behind the single-sex experiment is that boys and girls inherently learn differently, and this is something that flies in the face of recent neuroscience research, which we do include in the case.
What lies beneath the issue of single-sex education has a lot to do with people's perceptions on gender. Gender bias in education tends to occur most often as a result of their adherence to the philosophy of essentialism, or the notion that there are fixed characteristics of men and women, which influence what it means to be feminine or masculine. Gender bias occurs when one's expectations and potentialities are limited because of the expectations others place on them or on members of their sex in general, or when a person makes assumptions about another person's behavior, preferences, or abilities based only on their gender. Gender bias can reinforce the rigid, traditional stereotypes that girls should be passive and boys should be assertive. It can also serve to police and punish those who break from traditionally held ideas about gender. Students who do not present themselves within this feminine and masculine binary can experience difficulty in gaining acceptance from peers and adults, especially when those peers and adults adhere to traditional notions of gender. The socialization of gender within our schools promotes the notion that girls and boys are not equal. Hegemonic classroom practices reflect societal inequities by reproducing and reinforcing traditional cultural and educational traditions. Gender bias can be implicit or explicit. Elliot Eisner calls the hidden curriculum the implicit curriculum because it is what students learn about the value of the school and the expectations of adults, both of which may be unintended, that are not included in the formal curriculum, but that students learn during their school experience. Hidden or implicit curriculums can serve to reinforce existing social inequalities, such as gender bias.
I feel like one of the most compelling themes of this case involves inherently teacher deliberations. So in this case, we have leaders making non-research based decisions, which are actually anti-science and impacting not only the students in the school but also the teachers, because one of the major conflicts in the case is that some teachers are being asked to facilitate and endorse a curriculum that they don't believe in, and that goes against their beliefs and the research that they've done. So one of the questions is, what should these teachers do, and their new teachers, should they stand up to the administration? And how do we deal with leaders who make non-research based decisions?